I spent a little bit of time with our poinsettia painting last night, and I really like it. I was worried that some of the paint strokes might be a little bit too busy, but really when I stepped back from it, I realized that they were really fine. And that's really the issue when we're in the studio, when we're up close to our pieces, it's hard to judge sometimes what's really working. We really need to spend that time. I always put it in a little display on my island and just catch glimpses of it as I walk by and begin to see it a little bit more clearly, the way that our customers will when they purchase our pieces, or the way that our family will when we give the piece as a gift. There was one little thing that I wanted to make an adjustment on, and that is just some of the shadows I felt like were a little bit too dark and taking away from the piece a little bit. So in this video, we're going to mix up some more of our pink. I'm going to show you again the pink that I think is best for this particular painting, and we'll make a couple of little adjustments. So let's get started. So here's our piece as we left it last evening. And really, the areas that were kind of bothering me are how dark this particular veining is on this bract. I felt like this petal, this bract that goes back behind, is a little bit dark. And then particularly these two petals or bracts over here were a little bit dark and standing out to me. So I just want to soften those shadows a little bit. And it's very easy to come back in and just make some little adjustments. I have out on my palette here a little bit of the pyrrol red, some quinacridone magenta, a little bit of burnt sienna. These three colors I found for what I was going through on my piece, what I was going for on my piece. These three make a really nice pink. And then a little bit of titanium white, of course. And as I was studying this and trying to think about the best way to share with all of you how to judge your values in your paintings, I made for you a free download, a little value scale that you can print off and use to study what value your colors are. And I know that sometimes when artists start talking about values and figuring out what the value number is, that can sound very detailed and technical and a little scary, maybe. But don't let it be scary. It really is just a way for your eye to start seeing what those different values are. And it's also a way for us to talk, where if I say something is a value 2, you can look at the value scale and go, oh, right. Shelly's talking about that value. Remember, value is just how dark or light a color is. So this is just a grayscale value scale, and I have it laminated so that I can touch the paint onto each of these little areas whenever I'm studying what that color is, and then easily be able to wipe it off and reuse it. So if you'd like to grab that, it's for free. I'll put the link in this video for you so that you can grab it. I'm going to start out with a size 6 filbert brush and just mix up some of our pink. So I'm just going to pull together the quinacridone magenta and the pyrrol red, pull in a little bit of burnt sienna. This is that brush that I was talking about in a previous video that is a little bit loose in the ferrule. And then I can start to bring in some titanium white. You can see that I stepped off. I'm sorry for the glare. I stepped off a little bit so that I have lots of different colors here. And another thing that I think I'd like to do while I'm making some adjustments is amp up some of the highlights on a couple of the petals as well. So let's see where this color is. And since we have the value scale here, let's just touch some paint to it and see what value this lighter pink is. And we can study it by just tapping the paint onto our piece, onto the scale, and just seeing where does it disappear? Where does it look like it sort of melts into the color? And really, you can see the pink looks darker here than the background. It's getting a little bit closer. We're somewhere between a value 5 and a value 6 there. And I really think for the shadows that I want to have, that a value 5 or a value 6 is probably about right. I want to get out a little bit of that mixed color from my brush. Dip into a little bit of airbrush medium. When I dip into the airbrush medium, that just makes my paint a little bit more translucent. And translucent paint, when we're coming in to make some little changes, is really nice to have. So I'm just going to touch along this dark shadow that was sort of bothering me. Add in just a tiny bit more burnt sienna. And let's see if I want to come up here, maybe just a little bit. Just kind of lightly touching. You can see how easily, even though all of the background is dry, how easily we can just soften it just a little bit. I'm going to come over here and soften this a little bit too. You'll hear artists many times talking about this kind of a process as a glaze. And the glaze just means that some of the colors underneath are still showing through. I'm going to tap into the little bit of the darker there. I want it to not be too purple there. So by doing that glaze, some of the color underneath still shows through. It's very forgiving. We can just scrub into that area and just make subtle little changes without having to reinvent it all. You know, we don't, I think that a lot of times artists give up too quickly and they think, oh, it's ruined and I have to start all over. No, you don't. You can come back in and just make some little adjustments with some transparent paint and fix it right up. Let's go ahead and do this little petal down here. Let's tap into just a little bit more of the white. And I'm going to go ahead and blot out the brush and then just run the brush back along there. And I'm going to adjust this dark shadow here. It became a little bit more purple than I think I want it to be. So I'm just adding a little bit more of the burnt sienna to the quinacridone magenta. Touching along there, blot out the brush. I can dip it into the airbrush medium and blot it out on my towel. And then just dip just the bristles of the brush, just the tiny tip of the brush into the airbrush medium again, just to give you a little bit of moisture on the brush to be able to pull those colors together. I'm just trying here to touch back into it once again. I just don't want it to look like a straight line of shadow right there. So mostly clean brush again with just a little airbrush medium, and I can just kind of scrub between those two colors. I think that looks really good. I think I just want to add just a little more light onto the edge. Yeah, that looks nice. I hope you can see just how easy these little changes really are. It can seem like it can seem a little scary when you come back in to touch up, but start out with that very transparent paint that is really thinned out with the airbrush medium. And the great thing is that everything underneath of this is dry. So if you really just hated something, you'd be able to just, um, wipe it off. You can just lift it back off. A little bit of airbrush medium, get most of the paint out of my brush, and then come back in and soften the edges. So even though that paint underneath is dry, I can still soften the edges of the paint that I just added into that dried paint. Let's go ahead and come down to these that were kind of bothering me. So that was a little bit more of the mostly quinacridone, magenta, and burnt sienna. You can see already just that little bit really helped that. I don't have very much paint in my brush here at all, but it's honestly just enough to cover some of those areas. Let's go ahead and dip into the lighter highlights again and make some simple highlight strokes. Clean out my brush a little bit, get most of the paint out. And then I'm going to come back through and just try to soften this a little so it doesn't look like such a harsh line there. I think that looks really good. A little bit of this lighter color. Even today, the paint is drying so fast on my palette. Get most of the paint out of my brush and come in and soften those together a little bit. If it dried a little too fast, then just come back in with some light again. And at this point, now I feel like, and I'm going to just point it out so that you can see it here. The transition from the shadow that we have, the lightened shadow that we just did, and this highlight that I put on just now, there's too big of a range. There's too big of a difference in the value. So I want to come back in with something that's in between, not this color and not this color, but right in the middle of that. And that will help me bring that together a little bit better. So let's mix something that's a little darker. to bring those together. Most of the paint out of my brush. Just a little airbrush medium left, and then just touch along those strokes to soften them together a little. That looks really pretty. I think that the last thing that I want to do is just come in with some brighter whites, some brighter highlights on the edge. And I talked about this in one of the last videos, that as the paint dries, it can dry a little bit darker than what you're seeing when you're in the studio. And even as the paint cures, even when your acrylic paint is dry to the touch, it's still curing and changing underneath. And so you can see some changes in colors, and often you'll want to come back to your studio or to your painting table and add some either brighter highlights or darker shadows after everything has kind of set up. So I'm just going to pick out a couple of areas that I really want to beef up a little bit with just a little bit more of a highlight. If your paint as you're painting this on dries too quickly, you might want to have just a second brush in your hand so that you can come back with a clean brush and tap along the edges just to bring it together a little. And so we'll just continue that process, just picking out a couple of places where we want a little bit more of a highlight. I don't have to get rid of all of the brush strokes. I just want to make sure that it looks like it belongs there. It looks like it's not floating off. Maybe a little bit up here. That paint got just a little bit too transparent. For these whites, before when we were doing the little adjustments where we were thinning out the paint to have more of a glaze, for these highlights, I want the paint to be not transparent. I really want this to show. I've had students ask me that before, like, how do you know when you should use the airbrush medium? And the best thing to think about, one is, do you need it to flow better? So the airbrush medium helps with that. But number two, do you want to affect the opacity of the paint? And by affecting the opacity, we can sneak up on it a little, make little adjustments without having to commit to big changes. I'm trying to get just a little bit of pink in my titanium white. And that's one of the things that I've noticed about painting this poinsettia is there's just such small incremental changes, such little value change makes a big difference. So if you think, I want this to be a little bit lighter, make it just a little bit lighter. Don't make your adjustments too dramatic all at once. Mostly clean brush. I'm just going to tap into some of the edges. I can look up and see this on my screen here, so I can see some of the areas that I might want to change. For you, take pictures often. Look at the painting that you're doing on your phone it will really help. I was sharing a picture of this piece with a friend last night, and it was really in the pictures that I took to share with her that I could really see some of those things that really stuck out that I didn't notice necessarily while I was in the studio. So I'm just trying to look to see if there's any other place that I feel like I need to adjust that shadow. I think we're gonna have to do something with the humidifier or something in our house because man, everything is just drying so quickly. I just added a little bit more of the quinacridone magenta there, um, just to soften that sort of purple highlight that, I'm sorry, purple shadow that was showing there. I think I'm going to come back in with just some pure white in just a couple of places. This little tip of this bract down here. Wipe out most of the paint. Dip into the airbrush medium if you feel like it's still going too far. And then tap that in. So you can spend as much time as you want to on this. Have fun with it. Don't get frustrated with it. If you don't like it yet, keep going back and forth with the different values. But I really think that those improvements that we made really made this piece everything that I hoped it was going to be. I hope that you have a lot of fun painting this piece. It's not easy. Um, and that's not the point of the everyday art classes. I hope that you um, grow in your art and try hard things. The hardest part about this poinsettia is just going back and forth, letting some of those different values come in, adding some that are a little bit darker, some brush strokes that are a little bit darker, coming in with brush strokes that are a little bit lighter, and just continuing to go back and forth between those values until you have it the way that you like it. I think if you start out with this pink, the naphthol red, sorry, the pyrrol red, the quinacridone magenta, and the burnt sienna, and you build your pinks off of that, every now and then you can add in a little bit of the phthalo blue like we did in some of the previous videos, um, to darken some areas. But I think if you stay with this pink that I showed you today and then adjust the values lighter with some titanium white, you'll have um, you'll have a pretty flower that you really enjoy. Yeah, it's very pretty. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I've really had so much fun painting this poinsettia. This is the first poinsettia that I've painted. So I hope that you enjoyed some of my thought process as I went through this, even some of the changes with the background that we made. Art is an experiment, and we can't know all of the things that we're going to have to know when we first start. We have to try some things, and if we don't like it, we can always adjust it a little bit and get a really beautiful painting in the end. So be watching for the next everyday art class. We will be having lots more of them coming. I'm having so much fun painting these. I did want to just tilt this so that you could see a little bit some of the detail that the engraved lines from the laser still leave on this piece. And when you view it from the sides, those little fine engraved marks really add some character to the pieces. And I'm really enjoying seeing some of those details. So with some of the veining, even where I didn't necessarily go in and paint a vein, you can still pick it out because of that detail that the laser left. So be watching for these. Be sure that you grab the poinsettia engraved panel at Shelly Parker Art. Those links will be in each one of these videos too. So have a lot of fun with this one, and of course, share it with me if you paint one.